Hey guys, what's up? MadSeason here, back with another Legion class guide. This is an ongoing series where I go over the core gameplay of each class and spec in the Legion Alpha, and sort of give you an idea of how they're played and how their core mechanics work. In this video, I'll be going over the Affliction Warlock. The Affliction Warlock hasn't changed too much in Legion, at least not at the level of Demonology. This spec still follows the dot and drain method to steadily take down your enemies. You have some new spells added to your arsenal, and some others were taken away. The overall class design is aimed to make you feel like a soul-harvesting shadowcaster. To facilitate this, you're still on the soul shard system. Just like on live, you have some abilities that generate soul shards, and some abilities that spend them. And just a disclaimer before we begin, unlike my other videos where I went over the Frost and Unholy Death Knight, Warlock is not my main class on live. I did a lot of training on both live and Legion to get a solid understanding of how Affliction plays and how it's changed. But keep in mind that this is from a very casual Warlock's perspective. Just something to keep in mind when I talk about a spell or give my opinion on something, and by all means, if you catch any errors, feel free to let me know so I can patch them up with an annotation. Also keep in mind that this is all alpha gameplay, so things that you like or don't like are always subject to change. As I said, a lot of spells have been changed, removed, or added. I'll go over all of them one by one in the spellbook, and I'll also show them all in action so you can get a good idea of how the spec plays to see if you would like it or not. I'll sort of go over these in order of importance, putting a higher priority on the bread and butter abilities that make up the core of the Affliction spec. And at the end of the video, I'll show you some real fights and narrate them a bit so you can see how all of it comes together. As I'm going through these, keep an eye on the bottom right hand corner of the screen if you want to see the tooltips for the exact numbers and such. Let's start with our soul shard generator, Agony. This has been changed slightly. This still deals increasing damage as it ticks, and when you refresh it, it'll maintain whatever damage level it's currently at. This now also has a chance to generate a soul shard. It doesn't give you an actual percentage, but through testing it looks like it's around 10 to 20%. This is one of our two baseline soul shard generators. We do have another one in talents, and there are ways to get more soul shards, but by default our soul shard generation is pretty limited. Next up we have Unstable Affliction. This has been changed a bit. This is your big damage dot. It now costs a soul shard, and it has the effect to where if you reapply it while it's already active, the remaining damage on it is added to your new Unstable Affliction. So no worries about overwriting this if you need to burn some soul shards. This effect is really powerful on multiple target fights because if you have Agony ticking on everything, you'll be generating a ton of soul shards, so you can just spam this and turn it into a super dot. This also has the effect where if your target dies while it's active, a soul shard is refunded. And it still has the dispel effect. If someone tries to dispel this, they take some heavy shadow damage and are silenced for 4 seconds. We of course still have Corruption. Really not much to say, this is still our classic dot. But you may have noticed that it no longer has a chance to generate soul shards, so it looks like they just moved that effect to Agony instead. Next up we have Drain Life, which is a little different. This now returns a percentage of your maximum life instead of a flat number that scales with gear. This seems to get more and more powerful as you get better gear. I'm not 100% sure what stat this is scaling from, but as you can see here, it's 18% when I'm naked and 24% when I have all of my gear on. One thing I will say is that the mana cost is quite hefty, and if you're using this a lot, be prepared to use Life Tap a lot. To make up for this increased mana cost, its damage is greatly increased compared to the other specs. Affliction spec has the Secrets of the Necrolite passive, which increases the damage of Drain Life by 150%. So you can tell that they're really pushing to make this a staple of the Affliction spec. As of this build, Drain Life is actually part of your damage rotation, so this results in you being extremely tanky and easy on your healer's mana. Speaking of Life Tap, this is pretty much the same. It restores 30% mana at the cost of 10% health. As an Affliction Warlock, I find myself using this fairly regularly if I'm going from battle to battle without drinking. It's a pretty important spell to have this expansion. Next up we have our AoE spell, Seed of Corruption. This is a base 2-second cast spell that puts a demon seed on your target for 18 seconds. When that target takes a certain amount of damage, the seed explodes, dealing some shadow damage to all enemies within 10 yards, and it also applies corruption to them, which as you may remember used to be a soul burn effect. And we of course still have our normal demons. You have the same 4 to choose from. They all cost 1 soul shard and take a base 2.5 seconds to summon. We have the Voidwalker, who is still the tank. I won't go over every single pet ability here since it's not very interesting. I'll only list the differences for the sake of not making this video an hour long. For the most part these abilities are the same, they just have damage or cooldown changes and whatnot. I'll still mouse over them quickly if you want to pause the video to see for yourself though. For the Voidwalker, we have Threatening Presence, Shadow Bulwark, Suffering, Shadow Shield, and Void Reflexes, which are all the same. The only difference is its Consuming Shadow spell, which has replaced Torment. This deals some light damage to all nearby enemies and returns it as life to the Voidwalker. Torment, if you recall, did some single target Shadow Strike damage, so basically it traded some single target damage for an AoE life drain to make it a little more tanky. Next up we have the classic Imp. Everything is exactly the same functionality wise. You still have Cauterize, Firebolt, Flee, and Singe Magic. Next up is the Fell Hunter, which is a little different. You still have Shadow Bite, which deals some light shadow damage. This now deals 50% more damage for each affliction dot that you have on your target. It does look like we lost Devour Magic, which used to purge a magic effect on your target and heal the Fell Hunter. Spell Lock is still intact though. This is exactly the same. It's a 24-second cooldown interrupt that locks out School of Magic for 6 seconds. And finally we have the Succubus, which remains unchanged. You still have Lash of Pain, Lesser Invisibility, Seduction, and Whiplash, which are all functionally the same as they are in Draenor. We also still have Command Demon. This is pretty much unchanged as well. This just commands your demon to use its main ability. The Imp will Cauterize, the Voidwalker will use Suffering, the Succubus has Whiplash, and the Fell Hunter will use Spell Lock. And we still have our classic Fear. Nothing new here, just a single target Fear that has a 1.7 second cast time and a 20-second duration. We also have Health Funnel to keep our demons' health up when they're running low. This takes 12% of your life over a base 6 seconds and returns 36% of your demon's max health. Summon Infernal and Doomguard are still our big cooldowns. They both cost 1 Soul Shard. Their cooldowns were bumped down to 3 minutes, but their durations were also reduced to 20 seconds. The Doomguard still throws out single target Shadow Bolts at its target, and the Infernal stuns an area when you summon it and deals some AoE damage. And just like in Draenor, these two abilities share the same cooldown, so you have to pick the best one depending on your situation. Next we have Unending Resolve, which is still our Shield Wall and Anti-Interrupt. This reduces all damage taken by 40% for 8 seconds, and also makes you immune to interrupts and silences for its duration. This has a cooldown of 3 minutes. You still have Demonic Gateway. This is pretty much the same. You bring out a portal that you and your party members can click on to zip across the area once every 2 minutes. And just like on live, it seems pretty restrictive on where exactly you can cast it. We also still have our Crowd Control Banish, which disables an enemy for 30 seconds and is usable on demons, aberrations, and elementals. And finally we have Enslaved Demon, which allows you to take control of a targeted demon for 5 minutes. The spell itself is the same, but like I said in my demonology guide, overall I think it'll be more valuable in Legions, since obviously you'll be encountering a ton of demons since that's the focus of the expansion. And that's pretty much it for all of the important combat-oriented stuff anyways. Everything else I didn't mention are still functionally the same pretty much, maybe just percentage or cooldown changes. I'll mouse over them here quickly and you can pause the video if you want to see the exact numbers, but abilities I haven't mentioned yet are your Healthstone, Soul Will, Eye of Kilrog, the Ritual of Summoning, Soulstone, and Unending Breath. For passives we have Fell Armor, which increases your stamina and healing received by 10%. Our mastery is still Potent Afflictions. This increases the damage of your Agony, Corruption, and Unstable Affliction as you stack mastery. And like I mentioned earlier, we still have Secrets of the Necrolite, which increases the damage of your Drain Life spell by 150%. And that's it for every ability and passive. If I didn't list anything from Draenor, it was either moved to talents, removed entirely, or they just haven't put it back yet. Next up, I'll go over the revamped talents. Just like the abilities and passives, I'll go over every talent here and show you them in action. I'll also have a link to a talent calculator in the description if you want to see them for yourself. For the level 15 tier, we have Haunt. This is a base 1.5 second cast spell that deals some heavy shadow damage to your target. It has a 15-second cooldown, and if your target dies within 15 seconds of being hit with it, the cooldown is reset. As you may know, this also used to increase the amount of dot damage you deal to the target by 35%. It looks like that's been traded for more raw damage. I'm not sure about this one. Having a baseline ability stripped away and then thrown into the talent tree is kinda disappointing. Not only that, but I preferred the focus on dots more than just straight up damage. If I wanted to trade my dot damage for single target damage, I'd just play Destruction spec. It seems like a step back, but like I said, it is alpha, so hopefully we'll see a change here. Next up, we have Writhe and Agony. This allows your Agony's damage to ramp up twice as high. This is really good for longer fights like bosses and such. Not too useful for shorter fights though, because your targets will die before you can really see a benefit from this. Next up, we have Drained Soul. This is still a channeled spell. It deals some heavy shadow damage over a base 6 seconds and restores 8% of your life over that duration. If your target dies while you're channeling this, you generate a soul shard and it replaces Drain Life. So this is a more offensive version than Drain Life. It deals 4 times the damage, but it also heals you for 1/3 of what Drain Life heals you for. Once again, similar to Han, it's kinda disappointing to have a baseline ability taken away and then just thrown into the talents. It would be nice to have this by default, or at least make it not replace Drain Life. That way you could choose the best drain for whatever situation you're in. For the level 30 tier we have Contagion. This causes your Unstable Affliction to also increase all damage you deal to your target by 5%. I'm sure they're going to change this. There are a few things wrong with it, to put it mildly. The first thing is, with the current rate of your soul shard generation, you're not going to have Unstable Affliction up 100% of the time unless you have multiple targets to throw Agony on or you just get lucky procs. It doesn't stack at all either if you hit an enemy with multiple Unstable Afflictions. That, and it also just feels like this belongs as a normal passive or artifact trait, not a talent. Talents are supposed to be interesting choices where it's tough to pick just one. This just makes it so you deal slightly more damage to a single target like 50% of the time. It's, yeah, moving on. Next up we have something a little more interesting, and that's Absolute Corruption. This makes it so your corruption is permanent in PvE, and in PvP it lasts 60 seconds. Once again, this is something that's better suited for longer fights, the idea here being that the longer the fight is, the more global cooldowns you'll save by not having to reapply corruption. So it definitely has its place in some of the longer fights. And finally, for the level 30 tier we have Mana Tap. This consumes 40% of your current mana and grants you 15% increased damage for 20 seconds. This is pretty interesting. As it stands right now, Affliction Warlock's already burned through mana very fast anyways, so it's kind of rough to keep this up. It does spice up your rotation a bit, but it also makes an already weak point of Affliction even weaker. Keep in mind though that this says 40% of your current mana, so the best time to use this is when you're almost out of mana right before you life tap. For the level 45 tier we have Soul Leech. This causes your Drain Life and Drain Soul spells to both grant you and your pet an Absorb Shield for 30% of its damage for 15 seconds. There is a cap on the maximum amount you can absorb, and it looks like it's based on max health. At 382,000 health, it caps out at around 57,500, which is 15% of your maximum life. Next up, we have Mortal Coil. This is pretty much the same as it is in Draenor, a 45-second cooldown spell that incapacitates your target and heals you for a little bit. At level 100 and eye level 680 gear, it returns around 10% of your life. The only difference is the range is now 20 yards as opposed to Draenor's 30 yards. Next we still have Howl of Terror. This is a 40-second cooldown AoE fear that fears up to 5 enemies for 20 seconds. This did see a nerf as it no longer has its cooldown reduced when you are hit. For the level 60 tier we have Siphon Life, which is saw a return. This is another dot. This deals some shadow damage over 15 seconds and heals you for 100% of the damage it deals. I like this talent. The more dots the better in my opinion. One thing that's nice is that it's added to your mastery if you take it, so it's not a spell that'll fall behind once you start gearing up. Combining this with Drain Life in your damage rotation gives you some pretty insane self-healing. Next up we have Sow the Seeds. This causes your Seed of Corruption spell to embed another seed in 4 nearby enemies, but it also makes it cost a Soul Shard. This is a huge boost to AoE, as you can imagine. The Soul Shard cost isn't too bad because if you have Agony up on multiple enemies, you'll be generating enough Soul Shards to spam Seed of Corruption anyways. With the current generation rate of Agony, you'll start getting more Soul Shards than you can spend with this at around 4 or 5 targets, which is when you want to start using Seed of Corruption anyways, so it balances out. Next up, we have Soul Harvest. This is exactly the same as it is in Demonology. It's a 2-minute cooldown, 2-second cast spell that instantly refills 5 Soul Shards. This is great to have as Affliction specs, since Soul Shards are kind of hard to come by unless you have multiple targets. Being able to throw out 6 Unstable Afflictions in a row results in some huge damage, and I'd have to imagine that this is going to be the go-to talent in this tree for PvP. It's also nice since we have some ramp-up time for our damage. This sort of covers up a weak spot by giving you a huge boost to damage in the early moments of a fight while your Agony is still ramping up. For the level 75 tier we have Demonic Circle. This is a base 0.5 second cast ability that when you use it, it puts a summoning circle on the ground for 6 minutes. Whenever you use this spell again, it teleports you to that summoning circle, and it also clears all snares. This still has a 30-second cooldown like it does in Draenor, and it's also been modularized into one ability now, so If you want to reposition it while it's already active, you have to click off the buff. This is another spell that I think should have stayed baseline, not just for Affliction Warlocks, but for every Warlock. It doesn't even really make sense to take it away to begin with because we have no other mobility spells. I believe Warlock is now the only class in the whole game that has 0 baseline mobility spells, which is a huge issue for both PvE and PvP. I don't count Demonic Gateway because it has a big cast time, and even still there's a delay to where you can actually teleport. By then you could have just ran to your destination anyways. Next up we have Burning Rush, which is exactly the same. This gives you a 50% movement speed boost at the cost of 4% of your maximum life per second until you cancel it. You also may not be slowed under 100% of your normal movement speed while it's active. We also have Dark Pact. This is a big absorb shield that sacrifices 20% of your demon's current health and gives you 400% of that sacrificed health as an absorb shield for 20 seconds. If you don't have a demon active, it takes 20% of your life instead. This is the most effective when you have no demon out, since your highest health demon is the Voidwalker, which always has exactly 50% of your life. So if you want to get the highest absorb shield possible, you're going to want to dismiss your pet before using this. For the level 90 tier, we have our Grimoires. First up is the Grimoire of Supremacy. This passively gives your pet a 20% increase to health and damage. As you may know, it used to still give you the 20% damage increase, but it also gave you a whole new selection of demons to choose from, and they were basically upgraded versions of your normal demons. The Imp got replaced by the Fell Imp, the Voidwalker got replaced by the Void Lord, and so on. You no longer get those new demons, but it was confirmed by Blizzard that you'd be able to get those back through glyphs. Next up, we have the Grimoire of Service. This costs 1 soul shard, and it instantly summons a second demon to fight for you for 25 seconds. It'll use its special ability immediately when summoned. The Imp cleanses you, the Voidwalker taunts, the Succubus seduces, and the Fell Hunter interrupts. Next up we have the Grimoire of Sacrifice, which has Sa'a rework. This now sacrifices your demon to give you demonic power. This causes your spells to sometimes deal some AoE shadow damage. Once again, another ambiguous description. Through some testing it looks like it's in the 10 to 20% range. And as you would guess, the more dots you have running on your enemies, the more this will pop. So this makes Siphon Life a little more valuable since that's just another spell to proc it. I would imagine if you took Siphon Life, you would also want the Grimoire of Sacrifice as well since they synergize so well with each other. For the level 100 tier we have Soul Effigy. This creates an attackable soul effigy that shares your target's health. 50% of the damage taken by the effigy is also taken by the enemy you cast it on. It has a base 1.5 second cast, and you can cast it while moving, and it's only attackable by you. It also has no cooldown, so you can switch it whenever you want. I really like this talent. The idea here is you can sort of double up on your dots by throwing them on the effigy. This is good not only for the damage, but it's also great for soul shard generation as well, since you can put a second agony up. Our single target soul shard generation is pretty bad, so this covers up a big weak spot for us. Also, when you cast this, it's placed right next to you, so if you're in a fight that requires you to be out of range of an enemy, you can use this as a relay to deal damage from really far away. Because of this, I have a feeling that it's going to be a must-have talent for certain boss fights. Even in PvP it's handy because it doesn't have a line of sight. So if you throw this on someone who's pillaring you, you'll at least be able to get 50% of your normal damage through to keep the pressure on. You do have to be in line of sight of your target when you cast Soul Vessel, but once it's down, it'll deal its damage through walls. This also combos nicely with the Grimoire of Sacrifice if you put the vessel right next to your target and throw all your dots on it. I'm sure there's a ton more applications for this talent, and this is what I meant earlier when I said that talents should be unique and interesting. This is a little more interesting than a talent that sometimes gives you 5% more damage to a single target, huh? Next up, we have Phantom Singularity. This is another dot. This places a phantom over your target which does an AoE life drain to all nearby enemies and returns 30% of that damage to you as life. It has a duration of 16 seconds and a cooldown of 1 minute. I like this one as well. Once again, in my opinion, the more dots the better, and if you take Siphon Life as well, your self-healing is going to go through the roof. And finally, we have Demonic Servitude. This saw no changes from live. This makes your Doomguard and Infernal permanent pets rather than DPS cooldowns. In my opinion, this feels really out of place as an Affliction Warlock. This talent makes more sense for Demonology Warlocks since that's their specialty, but for Affliction I personally would have liked something as unique as Soul Effigy. That's it for all of the talents, as of this build anyways. Next up I'll talk about the artifact for the Affliction Warlock, and that's the Scythe Uthflesh, the Deadwind Harvester. This has a passive effect where your killing blows empower the Harvester, increasing your shadow damage done by 10% and doubling the passives that this artifact has. As for the passives, I'll go over them in a moment, but this artifact also has the effect where the tormented souls that you've harvested will periodically attempt to escape. If you kill them, you get back 10% mana. So this is how we're going to get some mana back. As I said, Affliction Warlocks burn through mana quite fast, so this is a really important effect. The souls themselves move very slowly and have very little health. Having another target is also good because it's an opportunity for more soul shards. So I like to throw off a quick agony on them, and sometimes it'll generate a free soul shard. If you want a guaranteed soul shard, these are great targets for drained soul if you took it, so this effect makes that talent even more valuable. The artifact itself has an ability called Reap Soul. This is another dot. It has a base 2-second cast and a 45-second cooldown, and what this does is it throws a dot on your target similar to Agony where it ramps up over time. This is a really interesting artifact ability because it doesn't ramp up in damage like Agony. Instead it ramps up in frequency, meaning it'll tick faster and faster, and when this dot is nearing the end of its duration, it's like a machine gun. This combos really well with the Grimoire of Sacrifice, especially near the end of its duration. I counted how many times it ticks, and it ticks for a total of 52 times over its 42-second duration. This is incredibly bursty near the end of its duration, and it's also not dispellable, so good news for all of you PvPers out there. There are some interesting passives you can unlock as well. You can find calculators for this all over the place. I'll have a link in the description, but I'll go over the more major ones here. First up, we have Wrath of Consumption. This gives you a 2% increase to damage for your dots whenever you kill an enemy, and it stacks up to 5 times. The duration is only 10 seconds, so you're going to be hard pressed to keep this up unless you have a lot of targets up. It'll be important to hold off on killing those escaping souls for when this is about to expire if you want to maximize your damage. Next up, we have Soul Flame. When you kill a target, it bursts into flames, dealing some AoE shadow damage to all nearby enemies. This is a big boost to your AoE damage. To put it in perspective, I did some testing and it looks like the explosion damage is around 4 times the damage of a single corruption tick, so it's pretty significant, especially if you have a lot of targets up. To maximize the effect of this trait, you actually want to be in melee range because the souls that try to escape you spawn right next to you. So you want to make sure those are close enough to your target before you pop them, or else you're going to be wasting some damage. And we have Harvester of Souls, which causes your drain spells to have a chance to trigger on all enemies afflicted by corruption for 3 seconds. Once again, another nice boost to AoE damage and self-healing as well. This combos nicely with the Seed of Corruption since, as you may remember, that applies corruption to all targets hit. It looks like this trait hasn't been implemented in this build yet, so unfortunately I can't show you this one in action. We also have Fatal Echoes, which causes your unstable affliction to have a 25% chance to reapply itself when it expires. This is a pretty big source of damage. It can proc multiple times in a row, so this has the potential to give you a ton of free damage. And finally we have Sweet Souls, which causes your Healthstone to fully heal you, and any party member who uses your Healthstone also heals you for the amount that they were healed for. This is a really cool trait to have, and combining this with the fact that Drain Life is part of the Affliction Warlock's damage rotation, it'll be incredibly easy to heal in raids. The rest of these are pretty generic, some interesting stuff, but mainly just percentage increases to abilities and such. I'll mouse over these quickly and you can pause the video if you want to read them, and like I said, I'll have a link to that calculator in the description if you want to check them out. You don't have to choose between any of these traits, you'll be able to get them all eventually. You just need to get enough artifact power, which you'll get by questing, PvPing, raiding, and so on. And that's it for all of the abilities, talents, and artifact traits, at least for this alpha build anyways. I'm sure they'll add more or change some stuff later on, but that's okay because the purpose of this video is just to give you a basic idea of how the spec is played, and that's something that's very unlikely to change as they update the game. Now let's put all of this together. The only way to get an idea of how the spec is played is to see it in action, so as always I'll show you some basic fights here and narrate them a bit. Here are some single target fights. For talents I have Drained Souls, so I'm sacrificing some healing for that extra damage and soul shard generation. But I did pick up Siphon Life to kinda make up for that. I also picked Absolute Corruption so I don't have to waste a global to refresh that. And I also grabbed the Soul Effigy so I can double up on my dots for that extra 50% damage and soul shard generation. And it's what you would expect. Just a matter of keeping your dots up on your target, being extra careful not to let Agony reset. Whenever a soul tries to escape, I like to throw an Agony up on it and try to get a quick soul shard. As you can see, after just 2 fights, my mana is looking pretty low, so killing those souls is vital for that 10% mana boost you get. Once again, I'm trying to stay in melee range here because of that Soul Flame trait. Also, since I have Drained Soul, I like to kill the escaping souls with that for that soul shard. As of this build, it's a little clunky because there's like a second delay before they'll actually die, so you're losing out on a lot of damage just for one soul shard. Here are some AoE fights. For talents I have Sow the Seeds, which if you recall makes Seed of Corruption spread to 5 targets. And I also have Phantom Singularity for that AoE life drain. I open up the fight by putting Agony on everything for that soul shard generation. Once everything is reasonably packed together, I pop my Phantom Singularity and summon Infernal, and from there it's just Seed of Corruption spam. Like I said earlier, the soul shard cost is pretty irrelevant on Seed of Corruption because when you have Agony ticking on multiple targets, your soul shard generation is crazy. The AoE feels very strong as long as you take Sow the Seeds and Phantom Singularity. Sow the Seeds in particular is insanely good for these AoE fights. Phantom Singularity there is mainly just to keep me alive in case my Voidwalker dies or loses aggro, but it still does some good damage in addition to that survivability boost. I ended up not choosing the Grimoire of Sacrifice because the damage is fine. I'd rather have my Voidwalker soaking up some damage instead of having that AoE proc, but I can definitely see taking that talent if you're running a dungeon with other people. And here's a longer single target fight. Same talents as my short single target fights, except I switched out Siphon Life for Soul Harvest so I can start the fight with 6 unstable afflictions. This is a huge boost to your starting damage. Remember, you can overlap these unstable afflictions because it always adds up the damage whenever you reapply it. I follow that up with my normal dots, Agony and Corruption, and I try to get Reap Soul up pretty early since that has such a long ramp up time. And then I start with my Soul Effigy and dot that up. Other than that, it's just a matter of keeping up with your dots and also making sure to pop those souls that try to escape from you. Once again, I have Drained Soul, so it's a good opportunity to grab a soul shard whenever they appear. And also try to make sure you stay in melee range because remember, these explode when you kill them via the Soul Flame trait. And that's all there is to it. Hopefully you have a better understanding and feel of how the Affliction Warlock's core gameplay works. I think it has its ups and downs. To me, it still retains its soul harvesting Shadowcaster identity. Remember, I don't main Warlock on live servers, so take this as a very casual opinion, but I think there's a lot of room for improvement. Some of the choices they made talent-wise could definitely be looked at again. It seems like they stripped away a lot of core abilities for the Affliction spec and just put them into talents. I personally think that Drain Life and Demonic Circle at least should be baseline. Maybe even Siphon Life as well, but who knows, maybe I'm alone on that. There definitely are some things that could be improved, but at the same time they did a lot of stuff right as well. Soul Effigy in particular, in my opinion, is a really fun and interesting talent with all of the different ways that you can use it. If we had just 2 or 3 or more abilities as interesting and as unique as that, I think we would be set. I don't know, I think a lot of people will have mixed opinions. There's a lot of good and bad, but hey, that's why we have alpha testing, I guess. Hopefully Blizzard takes a good look at all of the feedback they're getting and act accordingly. If you want to see more Affliction gameplay, I also did a full dungeon run. No commentary on that though, just some raw gameplay for those of you who want to see more of what this spec is capable of. I'll have an annotation for that right here and a link in the description if you want to see that. Also, feel free to leave me a message about your opinion on the state of the spec for Legion, especially all of you veteran Warlocks out there. Regardless, whether or not you like the changes, I hope you at least found this video informative, interesting, or entertaining in some way. I had a lot of fun making it, and I hope you had a lot of fun watching it. Thanks for checking it out. I'll be doing guides like this for every spec and for every class in the game, so keep an eye out for those if you're interested. And if you have any feedback or suggestions, feel free to leave me a message. There's always room for improvement. And once again, I'll have a poll up in the description if you would like to vote on the next class. No tanking or healing classes yet, I'm still training those, but hopefully you can find a spec in there that you would like to see. Anyways, I hope you found this video helpful. Give it a like if you liked it, and if you really liked it, let me know in the comments and subscribe. And as always, thanks for watching, good luck, and peace!